Welcome to the show. So I am here with Josh Balner from Strategic Credit Solutions. Josh, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about who you are, your company, your services, and how you serve a community here.
Thanks, Sam. Very much appreciate you having me on. So, Strategic Credit Solutions has been around now for 13 years. It doesn't seem like that long, but it's been a while. And we operate mostly in a business to business capacity within the mortgage broker community, offering clients an alternative to consumer proposal when they're equity rich. So, basically, it's an opportunity to reduce debts informally without a long standing punitive effect on their credit.
Okay, so alternative to consumer proposal. How long has this been an option, and what makes it better than a consumer proposal? If someone listening doesn't know about that.
Now, it's been around for, well, since time eternal, I would say, but it became big business in the late 2000s. And back then, we had some American players come across the border. They brought in big, heavy wallets and they dominated the marketplace. But they dominated the marketplace with some unscrupulous practices. So it caught attention from the regulators pretty quickly. And then, circa 2015, we had the Ministry of Consumer Protection come in, call a meeting for all of the licensed debt settlement companies and ask us what exactly we do. So at that time, it brought about a monumental regulatory shift and basically regulated debt settlement out of business. This was actually done as a result of banks lobbying. They were losing too much money. So the banks lobbied and said, look, put these guys out of business. And these American companies made it super easy to do because they had models where they were charging clients upfront money. They were telling them, don't make your bill payments, give it to me. We're talking people have 800 credit scores, people that weren't in trouble at all, but they would have these advertisements saying, pay 30% of what you owe, don't worry about it, give us your money, it'll all be fine. And what these people ended up doing was just holding the money in their accounts while the clients missed payments to the creditors, and they ended up getting sued. It was a debacle. So it's been around for a very long time, but it's a very niche solution, and it really only benefits clients in two regards. In order for an informal settlement to take place, two criteria. Number one, credit already has to be damaged. So we're talking about people that are over leveraged, behind on payments, but are already in a bad way. So the credit score will already be relatively low, probably too low for conventional banking. Criteria number two would be access to a lump sum of money. Now, most of the time, we're doing this for homeowners because the money would come from an equity takeout of the home. And because these people are homeowners, we're not achieving these 30% payouts. We're achieving more like 70 to 80% payouts. So, one of the big things that you'll hear a lot of online and on TV, basically any advertisement where you're seeing debt relief, you're seeing a common theme of pay 30 cents on the dollar. That's a number that gets thrown around a lot in this space. And that number is typically referring to a consumer proposal, which is looked after by those are looked after by the licensed insolvency trustees. And the only time they're actually achieving those results is when we're dealing with people that don't own homes. So informal settlements, usually homeowners, definitely have access to a lump sum of money and are already in a bad way with their credit.
Okay, so definitely a lot to unpack. So what I'm getting at then, you mentioned that there's not a lot of regulation, a lot of red flags. Advertising will pay 30 cents on the dollar, letting the creditors kind of creep up, and these people are going with good credit going to a not so good situation, and that's where you kind of came in. I remember, so consumer proposals, when they don't have access to equity, credit could be damaged, and then your solution is where they have equity rich and they have the ability to repair their credit, but they're not able to get conventional banking. Is that correct?
Precisely. Now, to be clear, consumer proposals can be put into place even if there is surplus equity. So homeowners could technically file consumer proposals, but if there is enough equity whereby a transaction is possible, so basically if you're going to have enough money for a mortgage broker or bank to help you, you're most likely going to be worth too much to actually save any money through that consumer proposal. So what the trustee will usually do in those cases is do a 60-month interest-free payment plan on the entire debt load. But what we've seen lately is the creditors are actually pushing back on the trustees. And they're saying, well, whereas before we would allow you a 20% reduction in the debt to us to cover your fees, Mr. and Mrs. Trustee, now what we're doing is we're going to ask for 100% back in full directly to us. The trustee fee, 20% of the amount that the banks receive, has to be capped on top. So what you're now seeing are consumer proposals worth 120 cents on the dollar in payback for homeowners. So obviously not overly incentivizing to file for protection under the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act to pay back more than you owe today. Not necessarily a great option for a homeowner with equity.
Yeah, no, I could totally agree with that. What trends are you seeing now with regards to your services, the awareness to what people are looking for with your company? What trends are you seeing right now, just based on where things are at with the recent increases in the rates? What are you
Well,
finding out right now?
no surprise here. Volume way up,
Okay.
conversion way down. So you've got an environment right now where everybody needs help. Everybody needs help. But conversely, over the past 4 or 5 years, everyone was able to get the help because values were increasing, increasing, increasing. Now that they've been going the opposite, you see the lenders have tightened up. So now everyone's got their hand up. Hey, I'd like some help, but they're not actually able to arrange the financing. So I would say interest in debt relief options is way up, but the ability to action a mortgage consolidation or an informal debt settlement way down. So the trustees are now picking up a lot of business because for them, they don't need the lump sum. They've got the payment plan ability. So they're doing extremely well. But I mean, I don't think it comes as a surprise to anybody. Canada's in a particularly difficult, to put it lightly, place
Yeah.
right now. And we don't really see a clear and defined path out of this. Cost of living continues to be a huge issue. The banks are talking about the possibility of Bank of Canada reducing rates. What effect that's going to actually have on cost of living and
Yeah.
livability, I mean, remains to be seen, right?
Well, it's great you brought that up because we were in a convention and they were talking about cost of living, even cost of food. And one gentleman said, well, if it's 90% over last year, how is it going to go down to even half of that? Right. So the average Canadian is not making 90% more in their income to support that. So,
We're in a very tenuous state right now. And you also got to remember that these corporations have seen these numbers. And I mean, now we've already endured the sticker shock of it. So why would they be inclined to reduce further, right? I mean, we may see some adjustments in costing, but we're never going to hit pre-pandemic levels. Like we're never going to get back down to those
no,
numbers.
no. I feel like when you say that, it's almost like it was a phantom wealth. People thought they're a lot richer. It's like this joke where you go into a conference and you walk out like a millionaire. You know what I mean? Like it was very phantom wealth, the way things were appreciating and going up. And now we're seeing a more balancing of the market, better opportunities for some people. But like you said, a lot of challenges for some homeowners.
People that have been using their homes as ATMs for the last 4 or 5
Yeah.
years, that's going to be a
Right.
challenge for them because, the bill has come due.
Yeah, and because that most of the money is the bank has control over the rules, right? So they're rewriting the rules and saying, hey, you know what? Wait a minute, we don't think we can do this right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so now when people are looking for settlement, what is the first step for them when they are, they're going through financial hardship? How do they kind of go through that path? I know it's a big question. And when should they like engage your services when it comes to and should they have to sell? Do they have to sell the property or do they get to keep it?
So, I mean, ostensibly they would remain in the property. That would be ideal. But I think the logical flow here would be recognize you have a problem before it's too late. So, catching it early is essential, right? You want to make sure as soon as there's any thought entering your mind of not being able to make a payment, that's the time to start looking for help, not after you've already missed several payments. And I'll launch into a greater description of this in a little bit. But number one, talk to your bank, see what they're willing to do for you. Hopefully, you've been with them for a long time and you can play to the relationship. Start there because if they'll do something, that'll be by far the cheapest option. If you talk to your bank and you're declined, the next thing to do would be talk to a mortgage professional, assuming you want to keep the home. If you want to sell the home, then you already know what you've got to do. Talk to a realtor, get that place on the market. But if you want to stay, first step would be talk to a real estate professional, a mortgage broker. That mortgage broker is more than likely going to work with a company like mine. There's only two of us in the country, really. So it'll most likely be me. And if the credit is bad enough, then I'm probably going to get to look at this file and I can brief that mortgage professional on what can be done from an informal debt settlement perspective. But basically, talk to your bank first, talk to a mortgage broker, try to get a full on consolidation just to replace bad debt with good debt. And if you're already in a place where you've missed some payments, your credit score is already very low, then it's worth definitely having a discussion about the informal debt settlement stuff because we're not going to make it any worse. So start with your bank and work your way down.
Okay. Yeah. So certainly. So definitely giving homeowners that kind of guide and preventative, like you said, making sure that they look at this beforehand. So it's not an issue after. bringing up the fact that banks are not willing to, or looking at it with a real estate and mortgage professional to figure out if they can consolidate bad debt. When do people mostly reach out to you in the process? And like, what are things that people need to look out for when it comes to these companies? Because I know that not every company's created equal, just like a, syndication or a joint fund or whatever. Like, what should they look out for other than the 30 cents? I know you mentioned that. I know your company's reputable, but any other comments on that?
Definitely. I'd be very leery, like everything in life, of being told to pay something up front. Anyone that's not working on contingency probably doesn't have your best interest at heart and probably isn't able to put their money where their mouth is. I've always been a huge fan of contingency based agreements and compensation based on result, right? So
Yeah.
really, if they're asking you to put money into their account without doing anything, it's kind of a problem. I would also be very careful because what you see the most of advertising right now are debt consultants. And what these people are doing, they're basically lead generation companies. So what they're doing is they're taking in a ton of applications and basically just putting them in a consumer proposal. Now, there's a few companies out there I know that are actually doing things properly there. They're actually taking the time to know the clients, to pretty the package up for a trustee to the point that when the trustee sees it, they know that it's a good deal for it makes it easier for the trustee to take it to the banks. So what that debt consultancy will do is if there's information that should be omitted from an application, they'll make sure that it is. So they pretty up that application. But there's also a cost associated with this, and the clients can call the trustees directly. So you want to make sure if you're dealing with a debt consultant that you're dealing with a good one. And there are a few that are good, there are many that are not. So the OSB, which is the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy, they released a white paper in December talking about the dangers of the debt consultancy industry. So this went out to all of the licensed insolvency trustees nationwide, and it reprimanded them for taking referrals from these debt consultancy networks. So the OSB is watching very closely this debt consultancy marketplace. Be interesting to see what plays out with this, but definitely make sure that the people you're talking to on the other end of the phone either are licensed to do what they do. And if they aren't, make sure you ask them, what sort of options do you have? Because if you're unlicensed and the only option you have is putting you in touch with this one singular licensed entity, why am I paying a surcharge to do that? I can reach out directly.
Yeah, the lack of value there, because like you said, that was very alarming when you said that they just take those files and put them in lead generate for debt people and then use that as a leverage to gain a referral fee. There's also a conflict of interest there. Because these people now, are they licensed financial advisors, or is that like a red flag? Like, let's say
No,
no, they're
these
not. So
people
they're
are not
not.
credentialed. These people are not credentialed at all. And again, some of them, I don't necessarily know that you have to be credentialed to do what these people do. If you have enough insight into the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act and into the credit debt life cycle, I mean, anybody can be an expert on this subject, truly, if you've invested the time. You just want to make sure, really, the role that these people should be playing is they should be, at the same time they're a lead generation company, they should also be a triage center and filtering these people to the option that best applies to them. So what these people should be doing is saying, well, you do have surplus equity, which means you should be talking to a mortgage broker, not a licensed insolvency trustee. Or you own a home that you can't afford anyways. Even if we consolidate all your debt, you can't afford this house. You should be talking to a realtor. You've got to sell. Right. So what they should be doing is lead generating, triaging, and directing them to the path that makes the most sense for their situation. That's not what we're seeing on the vast majority of them. The vast majority of these people don't actually care. What they have is a copy and paste model where everybody goes into the same bucket. It all goes to the same place, regardless of whether or not they should be there. And they're charging these clients for bad advice.
Mm. And it seems like correct me if I'm wrong here. Like you talked about something being government regulated, which was that one name.
The OSB. Yep.
Yeah. So it seems like the government is starting to look at regulations around private money and how this is all working, because there's a lot of things happening on, as far as that shouldn't be happening, right? With people's money and debt and.
Well, not just the OSB either. So that's from a regulatory perspective under the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, but also FSRA in Ontario, right? The Regulatory Authority on Mortgage Brokers. They've launched an unprecedented audit campaign on mortgage brokerages for private lending. And, a lot of it is surrounding material risk. So a lot of the conversation that's taking place right now is, are these investors that you're getting to invest here Are they aware of the risk? Are they suited to the risk? Like, are you taking somebody's life savings and putting them into a third position, 85% loan to value deal where they're going to lose their shirt if there's a market correction? You know, and if you are, what's being told to these people? Do they understand? Right. So you've got audits coming down from FSRA, you've got audits coming down from the OSB. So, you know, really all sides of this. The only people that aren't being checked right now are the lending institutions, the banks. And I mean, no surprise there,
Yeah.
because who,
They're
who
over.
runs the world, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to put my
Monetary
tinfoil
policy,
hat on
right?
for this one,
Yeah.
but you know, it's true. And I've seen some stuff lately, and it's imperative that this message gets out there because it
Please
is
share.
very, very scary stuff. Unprecedented. Over the last year, I've seen almost 10 instances now of two institutions, particularly Royal Bank and TD Bank, through two law firms, particularly, going power of sale over an unsecured credit card, taking someone's home over a credit card.
Let's unpack that because I heard about that too. And you're saying, what are the rules or guidelines around that? Because it could be, let's say, a $20,000 Capital One credit card or something like that, or whatever. What are the metrics when they can actually go towards secure, like assets and things like that? How does that all work when it comes to that?
Pretty straightforward. Can they afford to buy out the existing first mortgage holder? That's really it.
Absolutely. Yes, they can.
Yeah, and that's it. So the way that they amended the act in 2014, and the way that it was changed made it a lot easier to push through these writs of seizure and sale. That's what it's called. That's the instrument. It's the writ of seizure and sale. And it made it super simple. So basically what happens is you miss 4 or 5 payments on your credit card, you receive a plaintiff's claim. So once they serve that, you've got 20 days. You file a defense or you don't. The only admissible defense is you didn't spend the money, you didn't sign for the card. Most people can't say that. Most people did spend the money, most people did sign for the card. So you can't defend, which means they obtain judgment. If you don't show up, which 90% of people don't, it's a default judgment. Doesn't matter, go, don't. Either way, same difference. So once they get that default judgment, they file a request to clerk, and it says, please contact land registry office, let them know that we're issuing a lien against title and we're obtaining a writ of seizure and sale, which gives the judgment creditor the ability to sell the home. So what banks were doing for the last 14 years, as long as I've been doing what I've been doing, what the banks were doing was getting a lien, getting a writ of seizure and sale, telling the client, I can take your house, but not taking the house. What they would do is they would just sit on it. They would let the interest build and build and build. And then whenever the client either refinanced or sold the home, they would then collect their payout with interest. So oftentimes they'd end up getting paid back 4 times what the original amount was.
Wow.
So the banks didn't care. They were good.
So there's almost like a loophole in the system that allowed them to, because they can take first position anyway. They have the ability to, and they can just sit pretty and collect whatever fees that they feel like they want to collect. And so they're using that to make a bigger advantage for their situation. Is that right?
100%. Until recently, at which point all of a sudden they've actually started selling the houses. So I had a conversation.
Oh, good.
Sorry, buddy.
It's all good. You had a conversation?
I had a conversation with a name partner at one of these firms a couple of weeks ago, and he was very candid. It was a very candid conversation. I appreciated that. But we talked about what impetus it was that the banks now had to do this, and we both kind of agreed that the trepidation over the direction of the real estate market has really prompted some of these financial institutions to start considering setting a precedent, right? And making the consumer population aware that you can't just walk away from this. If you own a home, it's basically a secured credit card. Like when you apply for a credit card, if you own a home, you may as well use your home as security because they're going to go after it if you miss your payments, but you're not going to enjoy any of the benefit of having that security unless you use it, right?
Right. Wow, that's interesting. So definitely you guys do quite a bit. Now, when you talk about the process of, let's say someone engages your services, 2 things. What are some things that someone could do to prevent when it comes to knowing and understanding the risk? Let's say, having a certain amount of months aside when they have another property or another rental property. And the second thing is, what does that process look like when it comes to negotiating the debts and getting those debts down when it comes to the client, the settlement? and all that kind of stuff, if that makes sense.
Sure. So, I mean, cardinal rule of thumb is always have 90 days, right? 90 days worth of living expenses, always have it. And if you don't, you got to find a way to get there or you're not living within your means. You've got to be prepared for something to happen. Now, when something happens, as soon as you see that things are starting to go south, again, first thing you do, call your bank. Next thing you do, call a mortgage broker or a realtor if you're going to sell. There's one or the other, but you got to do something. Don't sit back and wait because the bank's not going to give you that time. They're going to take decisive action. So at that point, once you've decided, yes, I want to tap home equity, or yes, I'm going to sell, that financial professional hopefully has the connections to the debt settlement professional that you're going to want to talk to. So my company specifically doesn't really deal with the general public. We're basically exclusively business to business. So, you know, people like mortgage brokers and realtors will be the ones to send the clients in. So what we'll do, and 90% of the transactions we're doing are equity based from a second mortgage. So for a client journey would look like this. Call a mortgage broker, fill out an application. As soon as the broker gets that application, they're going to pull credit. They're going to take a look at what damage has been done. If the damage it warrants my involvement, then that would go over to the debt settlement company. The debt settlement company would do an analysis from a total debt, a debt savings perspective, a timeline, send it back to the referral source, being the broker or the realtor. That would then be communicated back to the client. So the realtor or the broker would be a conduit for the client until which point the client decides to proceed. So at the time where the client signs a deal, that's when we'd get involved. So whether it's a mortgage commitment where they're doing an equity takeout or a sale, when a firm purchase and sale has been achieved, that's the point where we'll get involved. And then my law firm would reach out directly to the client, have a free consultation, talk about what can be done, manage expectations. From a timeline perspective, anything where we're dealing with an internal recoveries division. So if we're talking to the banks themselves, so that would be basically you've missed one payment to you've missed 4 payments. Those things can take upwards of 30, 60, 90 days, depending on how early on we are. If you have someone that's only missed 1 payment, we're going to need to see 2 or 3 more missed payments before the bank's willing to cut a deal with us, which is very different than a trustee. They can do it right away, but informally, we have to wait. So that'll be a longer period. So normally what will end up happening is if it's a mortgage transaction, the mortgage transaction will either have to go, we'll have to close and we'd hold back the money in a trust account until we get to that point, or we'd have to wait for the transaction to take place if there's a shortfall because we've got to shrink the debts first. So it'll be a waiting game if you're only a month or 2 behind in order to make that happen. But assuming you're all the way, you've missed 5 payments, collection agencies are calling you, lawyers are calling, we can turn those around very quickly. That's basically as soon as you can get the money into the account is when we can do it.
Okay. We're going to make sure too in the show notes, we're going to have your information so people can reach out for a complimentary consultation.
For sure.
I think it's really important that your company, I think they do great work, is able to help these people who are in need. And a lot of, like you said, a lot of population doesn't have the awareness of the guidelines, the rules. So they're just letting Peter, Paul, whoever, let them know the guidelines, and they're behind their back, not really understanding what's going on. So
yeah, Sam, 100%. And I think the biggest takeaway here is don't wait until it's too late. Understand that if you're a homeowner, you don't own that home, the bank does. As if you have debt and you're a homeowner, it doesn't matter if it's a mortgage or a $1,000 Canadian Tire credit card. It doesn't matter. If you have a debt and you own a home, you don't own that home, because over $1,000 credit card, the bank is within their legal rights to take that house and sell it. And people just don't know that.
How do they know in the bank? Like, how do they know? Is it always that situation? If it's $1,000 or more, the path is going to be, if it goes to collections, do they start getting lawyer notes or letters? Like, how does that all look when it comes to, okay, my house is actually a potential in question now? Like, how does that work?
Well, I mean, you can take it from me that if you own a house, you've got a problem, but you can also wait until you get the plaintiff's claim from the creditor. And at that point, it'll say clear as day, Superior Court of Justice, we're filing a claim against you. And if you see that, it's not going to explicitly talk about the property, but if you see Superior Court of Justice, that means that they're coming after you. They're coming after you. And there's 2 ways to do that. There's 2 ways to enforce on a judgment. One of them is income. The other one is asset. So it'll be either or and garnishee of wages, seizure of property, right? So you'll take your paycheck, they'll take your house. So if you see something coming from a lawyer, you have a problem, Don't bury your head in the sand. It's not going away. And bear in mind that the post judgment on these are either contract rate or Courts of Justice Act. And, the banks aren't stupid. They're going to collect as much money as they can. So the contract rate between 19.99 and 35%, depending on who you're borrowing money from. So leaving this alone for 4 or 5 years doubles the amount.
Yeah, I think there's an old school, thought that, it goes to collections and it's sort of like one of those old Rogers video or, like just shows on your thing and that's it. But this is a lot more serious. And I don't think people know that when they take these credit cards, they're getting in bed even more so, right?
100%. People see write-off on the credit report and think that it's been written off. They forgot about it. No, it's a write-off for tax purposes. They're coming after you for the money.
Right. So let's say, that someone does the settle the debts. How do they know two things? First, I'll ask this one. How do they know that a closed account, is it a better effect on their credit versus the consumer proposal, being a settled debt? How does that affect that versus a consumer proposal when it comes to the credit?
Sure.
Credit.
So the consumer proposal is a public record bankruptcy and insolvency act item. So it reports akin to a bankruptcy on the credit report. So under the public record section, for anyone that's ever looked at a credit report, at the very top is public records. And that actually tells you things like loans and collection activity, bankruptcy, stuff like that. Consumer proposal is right up top, proposal to creditors, so everyone can see it. Anyone that wants to know can see that you filed a consumer proposal under the Bankruptcy Insolvency Act. So that's something that stays in the credit report for 3 years after the date of last payment, right? 7 years or 3 years after the date of last payment on the consumer proposal. So while you're under that proposal term, it's going to be almost impossible to obtain any kind of new credit. It's going to be a big, big challenge. The informal settlements is going to say settled and show a $0 balance. It will not be public record, nor will the entity that conducted the settlement for you ever appear in the credit report versus the proposal where the trustee is clearly outlined at the very top, right? So with the consumer proposal, it is a structured, formal, regimented program, and it appears accordingly. It's orderly debt payment. So it changes every aspect of the credit report. This informal settlement simply means it could, for all intents and purposes, mean you chose to take an interest credit when you paid off the credit card. So basically, I missed a payment, I paid my credit card off, and I asked them to take off the late payment penalty of $20, right? It could be that. The bank, no one looking will ever know that you ever went through an informal settlement, not for the fact that it says settled.
So where do you see this going when it comes to, I know you guys are a lot busy, you got a lot more files to deal with. Are you finding that it's getting to a point where you're sending these files off to, you're not able to make these files work anymore because either the equity or there's pressure on the values? Where are you finding that? And what's your thoughts of where things are going? Like, what do you think this industry is going and just in general with all this?
Oh man, it's always a huge question mark. I mean, right now, you're right. There's a lot of files where, from an equity perspective, we're not able to help with because the brokers can't access the equity. That doesn't mean that we can't help. That means that these people have to be willing to sell.
Right.
So I think the biggest challenge that we have right now is just making these people understand, guys, like if you file a consumer proposal, it might temporarily keep you in the home. But when that mortgage is up for renewal, the bank's not going to renew you. You're going to have to sell anyways. And when you do that, you've got a public record bankruptcy insolvency act item. So don't go that way. Get out now, sell the place, and let's settle the debts informally or pay them in full, what have you. But, it's convincing people to take the proactive step. And so many people, they don't want to sell. It's a huge upheaval, right? I mean, these people reach out, they see an ad online, oh, pay 30 cents on the dollar on their debts. And all they're thinking, their one track mind is, I'm going to reduce my credit card debt by 70%.
Yeah.
Then you talk to them and you say, well, actually, you have to sell your house. And, the pivot in that conversation can be unpleasant for sure. But people have to understand that the bill will always come due, and entering into a consumer proposal where there's a balloon payment at the end, right? Or it's structured in a way where they start off with itsy bitsy payments, and then we just bank on things getting better so that by this time next year, that payment can be made at twice the number that it is today, because there's graduated payment plans as well. These are dangerous options because if you fail, you've still got that public record bankruptcy insolvency act item on your credit report, but now you don't have a house. That's going to make renting a challenge, right? So you really want to make sure, if you're in this situation, The first thing you do, talk to your bank. The next thing you do, if you really want to keep the house, go the equity option. If the equity option doesn't work, sell the place. Like the consumer proposal for someone that owns a home should be the last thing you do. If you own a home, it's the last thing you do. It really only makes sense if you're going to walk away from a sale owing money. That's when the consumer proposal makes sense. It makes all the sense in the world for that, or if you don't own a home. If you make money and you don't own a home, consumer proposals are great because informal options don't exist. Don't take a payday loan. Talk to a trustee, do a consumer proposal. But if you own a home, that's the last thing you should be doing.
Yeah, those payday loans seem like they just crush on interest. Like they just take 30% off the top. It's almost like a restaurant owner using skip the dishes. They're paying 30% to skip, right? So
No, it's insane. And finally, there's some regulatory pressure on them. So I think 2 months from now, the APR has been reduced from formerly 59% to 35% for usury. So that's nice to see because the payday loan industry was running rampant for as long as anybody can remember, right?
gotcha. Right. So we'll get to where people can find you. I appreciate your time. This is really, really informative about what you guys do. Is there anything that you want to add that our audience should know? Some takeaways here are, definitely don't wait. Don't bury your head in the sand. Any credit card companies can use your house as collateral without you knowing it. And don't wait for those lawyer notices, what to look for in those notices. Is there anything that you want to share with our audience as well?
No, I mean, I think you've covered all of the major points. Just remember, owning a home and having debt, it's not your home. That's the big takeaway from this. Do something about it proactively. Don't sit back and wait.
Yeah, and to your point as well, like selling is not losing, right? If you have, 3 properties or 2 or 1 or 5 or 10, selling one to get into a better situation and having, a trusted person that's done this many times can definitely help you get into a better situation. Like you said, no letters, no worries about, creditors as well as lawyer letters. So Josh, well, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. We'll make sure that we have your information in the notes and people can get a consultation with your team about how they can get helped if they need it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sam. Really appreciate you having me out.
Thanks so much, Josh.
Have a great day.
You too.